Airplanes are supposed to be neutral spaces, sealed tubes of shared air, where backgrounds blur and everyone becomes just another passenger headed somewhere else. At 30,000 feet, titles are meant to disappear, replaced by seat numbers, safety instructions, and the unspoken agreement that everyone deserves the same respect. The aircraft itself does not care who you are. It responds only to physics, weight, balance, and motion. But neutrality is fragile, easily cracked by human perception. And on this flight, it fractured the moment authority was filtered through bias instead of fairness, through assumption instead of fact. The cabin glowed with soft white lighting, rows of seats stretching forward in quiet symmetry. Overhead bins were closed, their latches clicking shut with finality, each sound marking the end of choice and the beginning of confinement. The low hum of the engines vibrated through the floor, through the seats, through the bones of everyone on board. The air smelled faintly of coffee, recycled oxygen, and the restless impatience of people eager to be elsewhere. Passengers settled into silence, some scrolling endlessly on their phones, others closing their eyes, already rehearsing sleep. A baby whimpered briefly before being soothed. A businessman adjusted his watch for the third time. Somewhere near the back, a woman laughed softly at something on her screen. Routine wrapped itself around the cabin like a blanket, thin but familiar. Near the aisle stood a black woman in a beige jacket, her posture upright, composed, one hand resting lightly on the seat beside her as if grounding herself. Her expression was calm, carefully neutral, but her eyes were alert, sharpened by years of experience to recognize moments when calm alone would not be enough. She had boarded like everyone else, ticket scanned, greeting returned, bag lifted into the overhead bin without help or hesitation. She had followed every rule. Nothing about her presence disrupted the routine. She had chosen this seat deliberately, aisle rather than window, proximity to space rather than escape. Trava had taught her to plan for comfort in small ways. Her jacket was neatly pressed, her shoes practical, her hair framed her face in soft curls, natural and unhidden, a quiet refusal to reshape herself for approval. Across from her stood a flight attendant, uniform crisp, posture rigid, authority sharpened into something cold. The attendant's finger hovered in the air, not fully pointing yet, but close enough to feel accusatory. Several nearby passengers lifted their heads, curiosity sharpening their gazes. Conflict has a way of pulling attention, even from those who insist they do not care, even from those who believe themselves above it. The woman did not move. She did not shrink. She had learned long ago that looking away often invited more disrespect. She had done nothing wrong. She knew it. That knowledge settled in her chest like thin armor, not heavy enough to block pain, but strong enough to keep her standing. "You need to move," the flight attendant said, her voice controlled but edged with impatience, as if the request itself were an inconvenience imposed upon her. The woman blinked once, slowly. "Move where?" The attendant exhaled sharply. "Your seat is needed. You'll be relocated." A ripple of murmurs moved through the surrounding rows, quiet but electric. A man in a tailored suit leaned forward slightly, interest brightening his eyes. A woman by the window frowned, sensing something off but unable to name it yet. No announcement had been made, no mechanical issue cited, no reason offered. No one else had been asked to move. "I paid for this seat," the woman replied evenly. "Is there a problem?" The flight attendant's lips pressed together, the practiced mask of professionalism slipping just enough to reveal irritation. "There's been a complaint." A complaint about what? The pause that followed felt heavier than turbulence. It stretched, uncomfortable and loaded. The attendant's eyes flicked past her toward first class, where a white man sat with crossed arms and an air of entitlement that did not require words. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence filled the space louder than any accusation ever could. The woman followed the glance and understood immediately. Understanding did not soften the sting. It sharpened it, made it familiar. She had seen this moment before in different rooms, different uniforms, different tones. It lived in grocery store aisles, in conference rooms, in security lines. It always arrived dressed as concern and left behind humiliation. "I haven't done anything wrong," she said. The attendant straightened, authority settling deeper into her stance. "Ma'am, please don't make this difficult." The word landed heavily. Difficult. It echoed with history. Difficult when she asked questions in school. Difficult when she challenged unfair treatment at work. Difficult when she refused to smile through disrespect. Difficult was the label placed on her whenever obedience was expected without explanation. "I'm not being difficult," she said calmly. "I'm asking for an explanation." The attendant's finger finally lifted, pointing toward the back of the plane. "You'll be moved to another seat to quiet." Tension snapped into place. Phones slid discreetly into hands. A man across the aisle raised his eyebrows, already imagining how he would describe this later, carefully editing his own role into something passive. The woman felt heat rise in her chest, not just anger, but recognition. This was a test, one she had not volunteered for, but one she knew well. "I'd like to speak to your supervisor," she said. The attendant's eyes flashed. "Everyone is waiting. We need to depart." "So do I," the woman replied. "In the seat I paid for." A beat passed, then another. The engines hummed louder, as if urging someone to give in, to restore the illusion of order. The attendant's jaw tightened before she turned sharply and marched toward the front of the cabin, heels clicking with restrained frustration. The woman remained standing. Sitting felt like surrender. Her legs began to ache, but she stayed upright, refusing to make herself smaller for someone else's comfort. Her gaze drifted briefly to the window. Outside, clouds floated freely, untouched by rules or hierarchy. She wondered how many moments like this unfolded unnoticed every day. How often silence won simply because it was easier than resistance. The cabin buzzed now, tension thickening the air. Whispers traveled faster than the aisle itself. Some passengers shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware of their own silence. Others leaned forward eagerly, drawn to the spectacle as long as it did not require their involvement. A teenager watched openly, unashamed. An older man stared fixedly at his tray table, jaw tight. Minutes stretched painfully. The woman felt her heartbeat in her ears. She focused on breathing, on staying steady. She was not shouting. She was not aggressive. She was simply refusing to disappear. Every second she stood there felt like a quiet declaration that she existed fully, visibly, unapologetically. Footsteps returned. The supervisor arrived, expression neutral, eyes assessing the scene with practiced detachment. Authority, when used correctly, did not need volume. "What seems to be the issue?" the supervisor asked. The flight attendant spoke quickly, words tumbling out. "There was a complaint. The passenger is refusing to cooperate." The woman met the supervisor's gaze directly. "I was told to move without explanation." I asked why. The supervisor nodded slowly, listening. "Sir," she said, turning toward first class, "did you raise a concern?" Every head turned. The man shifted in his seat, discomfort finally reaching him. He cleared his throat. "I just felt uncomfortable." "With what?" the supervisor asked evenly. He hesitated, eyes darting briefly around the cabin. "She was loud." The woman did not react. "I haven't spoken since boarding." Silence fell across the cabin like a held breath. Even the engine noise seemed distant. Passengers exchanged glances, recalculating their assumptions. Some felt embarrassment bloom hot in their cheeks. Others felt something closer to guilt. The supervisor looked back at the attendant, then at the man again. "Discomfort alone isn't grounds for relocation." "But he's in first class," the attendant said before she could stop herself. "And she's a paying passenger," the supervisor replied firmly. Something shifted. A murmur rose, different now, edged with understanding. The woman felt something loosen in her chest. Not relief exactly, but validation. The truth had been spoken aloud, undeniable and clear. The supervisor turned to her. "You're free to remain in your seat. I apologize for the inconvenience." The woman nodded once. "Thank you." She sat slowly, heart still pounding, aware of the eyes on her. Some looked away. Others held her gaze with quiet respect. A woman nearby offered a small, apologetic smile. The flight attendant stood frozen, authority unraveling. The man in first class stared out the window, suddenly very interested in the sky. As the plane began to taxi, conversation returned in cautious fragments. A man behind her whispered to his partner, voice low. A flight attendant passed with forced cheer, avoiding eye contact. The woman rested her hands in her lap, fingers trembling just slightly. adrenaline still coursing through her veins. She knew this moment would replay later, when the cabin lights dimmed and sleep refused to come. She knew she would analyze every word, every pause, wondering if she could have spoken differently, softer, sooner. Experience had taught her that even victory carried a cost. The seatbelt sign chimed. The plane accelerated down the runway, lifting smoothly into the sky. Pressure pushed her back as gravity surrendered. Outside, the world shrank into patterns of light and shadow. Inside, something remained unsettled. A few rows ahead, the supervisor paused, glancing back briefly, not as an authority figure now, but as a person. Their eyes met. The supervisor gave a slight nod, an acknowledgement that carried weight. The woman exhaled fully for the first time since boarding. As altitude increased, so did reflection. Some passengers would forget this moment before landing, dismissing it as awkward but resolved. Others would remember, uncomfortably aware that they had witnessed something real. A few might even recognize themselves in the silence that had surrounded her. For the woman, it would not be forgotten. It joined a collection of moments she carried quietly, evidence of both resilience and exhaustion. Proof that dignity often required energy others never had to spend. The flight settled into routine. Drinks were served. Screens flickered to life. The world pretended normalcy had never been interrupted, but neutrality had been exposed as a myth. The plane continued forward, carrying more than passengers. It carried the truth that bias does not always shout. Sometimes it whispers politely and expects compliance. Sometimes it hides behind uniforms, policies, and unchallenged assumptions. And sometimes it is met by someone who refuses to move. When the plane finally leveled off, the woman leaned her head back and closed her eyes, not in escape, but in resolve. She had stayed seated, she had stayed visible, and in doing so, she had forced an entire cabin to see what usually went unseen. That, she knew, mattered.